I read the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, and he mentions this idea of single player versus multiplayer games, and how we spend a lot of time playing the multiplayer games in life, and that's all about comparing this and that with somebody else. But the real fruits of life exist within the single player domain, and these are the competitions that we have with ourselves. And ultimately, these are the ones which matter more. As I say this, it almost sounds obvious. We can hear something like I just said, but still be inclined to focus on the multiplayer games. And if that's the case, why? I think personally we're scared to become less multiplayer focused and more single player focused because we have been in the multiplayer game for so long it's become comfortable. And so a deviation would mean breaking out of our comfort zones, but it's also what we're scared could happen if we did break out of our multiplayer games. What would that mean for us? Would we be left on the curb whilst everybody else flourishes in life? If there's anything I've learned with the way the brain approaches things, it wouldn't be a far stretch to imagine it being that drastic. But speaking as someone who has disengaged from these kind of multiplayer games and made that a focus over the last few years, I can tell you that it's not going to bring the kind of life-ending consequences which it may seem it will. If I've spent a huge amount of time and energy investing into these multiplayer games, it may be troubling for us because we can think, well, then what was all that effort for? Was I really just doing that all for nothing? In a sense, yes, but not because it was your fault. It's just one of those things that by default harm us more than they need to before we've seen their futility. From a social perspective, playing these kinds of multiplayer games can increase our chances of survival. And so I think there's a level of hard coding there, which, whether or not we like it, is part of us, and we are wired to look to others to see what they're up to, how they're performing, so we can get an idea of where we sit. But as you know, these comparisons get out of hand and often become very unhelpful for us. So the culture of work often pushes the multiplayer agenda on us, because we are in this swarm of people who are being educated, being built up to work, and then we get to work and then we're on the promotional ladder, and all along the way we kind of create this leaderboard in our heads that we use to place ourselves in a kind of hierarchy. And it's this exact type of thinking which I think really is grown during the years of, for at least me, in secondary school, when we're taught to put things like popularity on a pedestal. And so there's a high level of investment in this way of thinking very early on. And then later on it becomes about status, wealth, recognition. And we're playing those same games that we might have been playing in secondary school, but just on a larger scale. We may even say that we're playing them on the global playing field rather than the immediate group of people that are around you. The thing is, these multiplayer games are just hamster wheels. They seem to have no end. And although you could argue that single player games also are kind of hamster wheels, at least with the single player hamster wheel, you're actually putting your effort into something which is really giving you something back. It's not harmful for you. One of the biggest issues is that these games that we play as a collective are often not in our control with their outcomes. We don't always decide how wealthy we're going to be, whether we're going to get a certain promotion, whether a group of people are going to react to us in a way that we want to. That is the outside world domain. It is separate from us, and it doesn't help us to try and control what we can't control, because the outside world is subject to its own forces. And investing in these multiplayer games means that we're trying to bend these very concrete forces to our will. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the point is that if we're putting all of our energy into something which may or may not happen, and we're letting that determine our sense of peace or accomplishment or what have you, then it's not hard to see that we're going to get in trouble in some way or another. Social media is one of the biggest multiplayer games that exists, and the return on investment is so low. But because we are hoodwinked early on into thinking that the social media games hold far more importance than they really do, we create beliefs around those experiences, and then we really get stuck in the hamster wheel because we decided at some point that it is really important to be engaging with that much investment in these games. So again, these games are hard-coded in us because they are built upon the two greatest necessities for human existence, being survival and reproduction. But these behaviors and thoughts that we blindly follow do get out of hand if we don't mediate them. And as I said, these hamster wheels kind of give a false sense of importance, and it's not hard to see how extremely hollow they are. But what I love about life being proposed as a single player game is that it's just us. Thank God there's no more competition other than how we were yesterday, and for that matter all the days before that. The truth is, the real games we play in life are the single player games. It's how on a day-to-day basis we're growing, it's how we're dealing with our thoughts and emotions, it's how we are leveling up each day, it's how we tackle our hardships, it's how we learn to go through them and reapply what we've learnt when similar things happen again. Those are the exact games which are truly valuable. The single player games just feel real. They're here right now, they are so close to us. But when we're playing these multiplayer games, it's like they're so elusive, they're far away, it just feels so much more imaginary. So why don't we stick to the one which feels immediately real? It's not to say that we can't play multiplayer games, but we don't give them the same emphasis. And the understanding that our story, and our story alone regardless of everyone else, is the center. Multiplayer games should not dominate our sense of self-worth. Naval says that single-player games often lead to lasting happiness because they are self-reliant, and they don't require social approval. And my experience backs this up to be true. We can spend our entire lives comparing ourselves to others and worrying about where we fit on some kind of social hierarchy, or we can decide to step off the hamster wheel, because that hamster wheel can run forever, and start using ourselves as the indicator of progress. Because honestly, the multiplayer game isn't fair to begin with. We are born with completely different situations. As soon as you try and compare yourself to another person, the fair grounds for comparison fall apart instantly, because the only way the comparison could be fair is if you were the same person. So the moral of the video, focus on yourself. It doesn't matter what's happening outside of you. Make it literally all about yourself in that way. And you may find that because you've stepped out of the worry about where you fit in on a larger scale, that you might actually start making a heck of a lot more progress anyway within yourself, because you're not putting yourself down all the time, and you have such a higher chance to find more motivation to work if you are comparing yourself to only yourself. Because when we compare ourselves to the outside world, the scope is infinite, and it's simply not fair. Sure, use other people as inspiration, but do it with the single player mindset. It's just you, it's your world, it's your life. Keep the focus there.